We're now going to consider some artwork from the early 20th century where abstraction becomes the most important element of new art. We were last looking at work from the post-impressionist artists. And what the post-impressionist artists had in common was that they took inspiration from the impressionists, but they took that inspiration in different directions, and all of them used abstraction in one way or another. Gauguin, for example, was using flattened areas of space in broad areas of color with distinct edges that created these sort of dynamic, expressive shapes that weren't really about representing something that you could see in the real world, but were more about interpreting it and creating a finished impression in the painting. About 10 years after Gauguin painted the painting you just saw, we see Matisse creating this painting, The Joy of Life. Now, Matisse had been involved in a movement called Fauvism that is using color creatively and expressively. But this painting really shows where he takes that idea and that initiative. He's using color that is not naturalistic. The skin tones of the figures in the central area of the painting are not too unreasonable, but the further you get away from the center, the more the skin tones seem to be these really interpretive skin tones that are more about creating a finished effect with the overall painting. So you have this sort of sense of rhythm and action and movement that goes all through the painting that is inspired by Matisse's interpretation of the feminine form, but then that inspiration becomes a treatment of lines and shapes and color. And those lines and shapes and color are really carrying the impression of the overall painting. In this painting, you can also see his interest in color and using color expressively. This is maybe a little bit more naturalistic than the painting we were just looking at. Its treatment of space is strongly inspired by Japanese art, and Matisse's motive in general is to create a painting that's going to make people feel good, that's going to communicate his sense of the peace and calm and beauty of that the visual experience can offer. Now let's have a look at this painting. This is from a little bit later. This is from 1935. Now this painting is interesting not just because of what it is, but because of the process that led up to it. It so happens that the series of drawings and paintings that went into creating the finished version are all collected and happen to be on view at the Baltimore Museum of Art. You can see these in person and you can see them in color, but I only have them in black and white here. So you can, if you look at the picture all the way on the top left, so that's the earliest one in this sequence, and you can see that his interpretation of the model simplifies her form and just focuses on the sort of edge lines, and he treats the rest of the space in a similar way. If you move to the image on the top right, you can see that he's further flattened the space so that it's almost just these sort of flat geometric shapes, and then the figure just sort of pasted down on top of them. If you compare the way that he treats the hands from one image to another, you can see that by the end of it, he's pushed the hands all the way out of the frame. He was like sort of trying one thing and another to make the hands, it seems, less distracting because he really wants us to focus on this sort of smooth and very subtle line that defines the majority of the figure. And he's getting rid of all of these details that could potentially distract you from that. He pushes them further from the center and eventually pushes some of them out of the frame altogether. So that shows you a little bit of what's on his mind, what he's choosing and what he's eliminating. This is another painting of his from the 1930s. You can see he's continuing along similar lines of thinking, focusing on broad areas of color, very satisfying curves and edges to those shapes. And the overall impression for Matisse needs to be calm and luxurious and even musical. Late in Matisse's life, he had colon cancer and had some surgery for that. And after that, he never quite regained full mobility. So he started making collages, large scale collages, and with direct assistance to sort of pin things up according to his sketches and his directions. So this is a later work of his that you can see in the National Gallery of Art in Washington. Look at how he uses color to create these very simple flat shapes, and then composites them into these patterns and rhythms that just feel so musical. And it feels like he would just like completely surround your visual field with these patterns and shapes if you could.